This is lesson number 2, and we're going to be talking about modeling props. Specifically, I'd like to talk a little bit more about how CAD logic influences the hard surface design and what you should expect, because as we've been discussing it previously in lesson 1, it's a little bit different from polygonal modeling. So it has good ups and downs, but it also has kind of like a specific workflow that if you understand how to follow it, you will get much better results. We will also talk about some additional tools. In lesson 1, we talked about the very basic tools, kind of like your day-to-day instruments that you're going to be using. I'm going to show you just a little bit more, both from create and modify section, and we'll talk about some other aspects of the Fusion UI. And then we're going to do a breakdown of another prop, and then I'm going to model it. We're going to be doing a scope for a weapon, and then hopefully we'll be able to use the same design in the final assembly. And I will also like to talk about addressing problems, basically how to version your designs so that you're not losing progress, and then you're at the same time can come back to it and redo certain parts. And this, of course, we're not talking about design history, we're just talking about saving separate files. And then we'll talk about design history as well, how this can be helpful, and I'll show you just a little bit more tricks, how I like to fix things, because of course nobody works in Iron Man mode where you just from start to finish you plow through it. A lot of times I come back and I add fixes, or a lot of times the client will want a fix, so you should know how to go back and change certain aspects of your design. So let's just talk more about the how CAD logic changes the way you design. The way I like to think about it is CAD logic is entirely different from polygonal modeling in terms of how you should be treating your models, because like we were talking about it, they are represented in 3D space in completely different ways. So the best way to think about CAD, specifically for hard surface props, is as if you're working with a piece of clay, or you're working with a piece of wood or metal that is completely solid. And probably specifically for that reason, the models that you're going to be working on inside of model category in Fusion, those models are called BREP, which is body representation. All of that is called solid modeling. So you should compare it to polygonal models where they are hollow inside. Polygonal models only represent the surface of the object, and if we take a sphere and cut it or slice it in half, a polygonal sphere will be empty inside, and CAD model will not be hollow. So if you keep that in mind, thinking about the process as if you're actually working with real material, this should give you a good start, because obviously you cannot really move faces or vertices in reality. You can cut them, you can add to them, but nothing crazy like in polygonal world is happening. So it's just a good mindset to start with. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to stay that way, but it's a good mindset to start with. Another key aspect of specifically hard surface in CAD is that every software influences your design. It kind of leaves, so to speak, a fingerprint. Like software has its DNA, and as you design in it, it kind of shows what software you were using. Again, in polygonal software, the easiest operation is to extrude a face. So that's like a signature thing for polygons. And for Fusion, the signature thing is Boolean operations, in my opinion, at least from the concept art point of view. So CAD definitely influences the way you're working. And you need to be ready for that. You need to have that mindset that you will not be able to do certain things. But if you're coming from 2D, and if you have never touched 3D at all, it should be a little easier for you because you don't have any preconceptions about how 3D should be working. Another aspect, it's important that you maintain a good ratio of working both from imagination and references. I would say that it would be a mistake to start working entirely from imagination. Usually, even if you're working from imagination, you're referring to certain designs you've seen previously in your, so to speak, inner library. But it's obviously a good workflow to prepare your references ahead of time. And as if you're designing from imagination, as you're going through with it, you should be constantly, I think, referencing something from the real world. This will help you keep the design grounded in reality. At the same time, all of the things that we're usually making in Fusion 360 are manufacturable, right? So you need to be referencing something that has already been done in real world. I personally like to reference real objects, some actual props, because it gives me a certain level of expectation how faces should look, how detailed it should be. The closer you get to the original source that you're referencing, the better. As opposed to referencing somebody else's design, where it has already gone through a prism of his or her perception, which means that you may have some unrealistic expectations from how that design looks and how it transfers into the program. Which again brings me to the last topic in this subcategory in this chapter, is maintaining reasonable level of detail. Maintaining reasonable level of detail means when you're working on a certain prop, let's say it's about the size of your palm, trying to fill it with insane amount of detail, first of all, is pointless. Second of all, is fairly unrealistic. Even if we're talking about really sci-fi future and stuff like that, manufacturing process leaves us with certain limitations, even in the future. So going extremely detailed on something a size of your fist doesn't make sense. At the same time, working on something much bigger than human scale, I would say like maybe like a huge environment or a huge spaceship. To me, just because of the way the Fusion 360 is set up, doesn't make much sense. The way I prefer to work with hard surface and Fusion is if it's a huge assembly, let's say it's a big mech, I would rather approach it as designing it with parts. So a head would be separate, body would be separate, arms and legs would be separate, or whatever it has. It doesn't necessarily have to have arms and legs. Basically, I think that the good rule of level of detail is to look at the references and do not go overboard with over detailing small stuff. A lot of times Fusion won't even allow it. And second, definitely break down your big assemblies into smaller parts. This is exactly what we're going to do later. I still consider a gun to be a big assembly. for a certain level of detail. So we're just going to model the scope separately, and then we're going to attach it to the rest of the assembly.